Alrighty, getting into the first questions. First question is from faded.eth. Oh, and this is a pretty generic one, so this might take a while. What is the plan with the merge? Are you, and I mean more specifically, are you guys on ETH proof of work, POW? And what about the deposits? I assume this means either. I assume this means on our protocol, assuming we have some. The plan with the merge is a wild one in general, right? Like very rapidly things are changing. As of a couple days ago, the plan from I believe it's like Chandler and a few other guys that are actually doing everything on miner side was actually to continue along with chain ID 1. And for folks not super familiar, every chain is supposed to have their unique chain ID, and this ensures that whenever you sign a transaction for that given chain, it can't be done on another chain at the exact same time, or this is just called a replay, right? And the big issue comes in when ETHPOW has this plan to just continue along with the same chain ID 1. And any transaction that you would actually do on ETHPOW, could it be trading away your ETH, trading away whatever currency, could then be replicated on mainnet. Obviously, that'd be a big deal, and that's probably what a lot of people were trading around up until a few days ago. You'll notice that the premium has decreased alongside, honestly, when everybody had the actual merge date confirmed. But the idea is that, you know, there is this trend towards a necessity to actually split the chain ID. So it looks like they're going with just completely reclaiming all of the Ethereum claimant IDs, chain IDs, but starting with 10,000, right? So there'll be 10,001. This kind of does reduce a lot of the interesting things that are actually going to happen. So a lot of the anarchists out here are pretty pissed that they don't get to have their fun. But for everybody actually running a project, it makes things pretty simple, right? If someone was going to be forking Swivel completely, you know, would that mean anything? Would that give them the rights to the deposits in our protocol? No, right? So at the end of the day, there is there's no rights to anything within our protocol on ETHPOW. That said, you know, I'm sure there will be interesting things going on, right? Whatever the value may be of an underlying token, in this case, it's going to be stablecoins. Whatever the value of that is upon the fork, you can still purchase whatever yield tokens or principal tokens from Swivel, combine them and redeem to underlying and take whatever profits there. So I'm sure there actually will be similar situations across a number of protocols where, honestly, we don't plan to maintain ETHPOW whatsoever. I think it's probably going to die within like 3 days. I think if people actually cared about the ethos of it, you'd just be using ETH Classic. But this is just a play to take more of a share for themselves, which was confirmed as of a few days ago when they added in the desire to mint 16 million ETH for themselves alongside the fork. But I digress about that, right? The point I'm getting at is that there's going to be a lot of projects that end up in a situation where essentially everything in the protocol is almost worth nothing, and people can come around and actually purchase the almost worth nothing and get that almost out of it, right? Because it will be worth something, is my point. What about the deposits in our protocol? So yeah, that's kind of my point. Like, nobody will really have to worry about their deposits whatsoever on our current infrastructure, right? Nothing will change. We just continue along like every day. The interesting stuff will just go and actually not valuing the deposits on Swivel in particular, or the N tokens and principal tokens, ZT tokens, but in actually valuing the underlying tokens to begin with, right? It's far more fundamental than to deal with Swivel, I think. And this is not even talking about the interesting conversation about the pricing around ETH. I'll mention that too. There are a lot of really, really cool things we can do once we launch our V3. So we do want to get this out soon. Not specifically to get it there by the merge date, but to ensure it's up soon in order for people to play around the actual redemption date for ETH. There are a lot of speculators that are trying to identify really what realistic timelines are. No one has any clue. Even up until a couple weeks ago, Tim, I mean, I said this on the last AMA, was talking about how soft the date for the merge to begin with even was. Um, so I'd like to think that there's a lot of interesting things you can do with derivatives around these timelines, right? Whether it is actually even the ETH core devs playing the derivatives and which I'd hope they don't, right? They have a lot on the line there. Or alternatively, just a lot more interesting things like, let's say, people borrowing ETH, right? There will be a big play to right before the merge, the block or the blocks before the merge, to borrow as much ETH as possible from every money market. And this is going to become a shit show in the lending markets, literally at that point in time. Because all of a sudden, I mean, Euler in particular this week is putting in a proposal to increase the cap higher, but every protocol will be completely capped on all their ETH borrows. 100% will be borrowed. So for a short period, depositors on ETH will be earning, thousands of percent APY. On Euler, again, I think they're going to be increasing it towards like 10K to incentivize people to remove those borrows immediately, right? And maintain like a more normal status quo. That's the stuff that I think we really can tackle. And when there's that sort of volatility and activity, there's alpha, right? And as Cozy said on our podcast the other day, wherever there's alpha, there's liquidity. So that's one thing we really hope to address. Actually, this is a similar question from Worldwide Weeb. I should have scrolled down a little bit. Similarly, how does the merge impact rates and such? And has there been any news on redemptions and how that works with staked ETH for you guys? So how does the merge impact rates? I talked about it on the side of ETH, but there's also the side of the staked ETH, right? Euler has markets for ETH and staked ETH, and I actually expect it's going to go completely the other direction now, right? You're going to have people that there will be some small amount that are trying to play the premium in between the two, as staked ETH is sold off for ETH, right? There's a lot of people with these levered up positions, effectively borrowing ETH to stake, assuming that the ETH rate is always going to be around 2%, right? Or less. On most like Compound and elsewhere, it's less than 0.5%. However, if everyone is borrowing ETH right into the merge, that pushes all of these leveraged staked ETH guys up to a multi-100% APY that they have to be paying, while they're only earning about 4 to 10. So I expect there to be a lot of staked ETH redemptions, and there to be a lot of interesting stuff to go around just because of these borrowing rates and the shifts around there. I think it'll be really, really cool. And I don't know if this really was impacting merge rates. You were talking about lending rates or staking rates or what? Staking stuff will be insane as well, right? The demand for block space it will be absolutely insane. If the entire point is you're trying to minimize how much interest you're paying on a multi-1,000% loan, you end up knowing, okay, I need to get this transaction in within like a couple blocks. And specifically then, right, there's folks that are just trying to borrow right before the merge, the few blocks before, that block space becomes extremely valuable. Like probably more valuable than any we've seen before ever in the history of ETH. And I expect it'll take a while for that to unwind, right? We'll probably see gas spike up to 1,000, and it'll take days to go beneath 100 again. So it's something I'm actually, again, pretty pumped for. It'll be really exciting. Has there been any news on redemptions and how that works with staked ETH for you guys? I honestly don't think there's been much news on redemptions. Realistically, people have been so myopic and focused on the actual merge itself, and a lot of people still don't even realize that you don't get to redeem alongside the merge. But I expect that will end up being a fun market, like I was saying before, for our users to just play around in. Right? Whenever there's uncertainty and volatility, there's alpha in derivative markets. And whenever there's alpha, there's liquidity. So that means we can create healthy markets and kind of follow up with a lot of these theses around, how markets trade, or while developers give these soft dates, how these lending markets actually trade around and impact how liquid staked ETH and stuff like that are. There's a lot of cool stuff. 1 second, I'm taking a sip. And again, final reminder for people if they want to just follow around, we're live on stream. Swivel Finance on Twitch. What are you guys up to with Premium? So this is something. Let me check who's listening on the call. This is something that we've been working on for a while, but it's not necessarily just with Premia, but with a number of options protocols, right? And that I think one of the most promising things that DeFi offers is the ability to take a position and perfectly price it and represent it. So this is applied immediately to things like to things like money markets and lending markets, right? You can only create these lending markets because you have Chainlink and you can get immediate pricing. And then we can only create our fixed rate markets because people like Compound and lending markets exist. But then there's even more you can do, right? We have these principal tokens that have a maturity value. And if you can predictably know this maturity value, you should be able to give or to do other things with it, right? It shouldn't just sit there. And that's where projects like people have probably heard of Fiat DAO are around, right? It allows you to borrow against your principal tokens. However, you don't even need to just like borrow and use loose risk. You can do things like actually create other time-based agreements. You know that by a certain future date, they will be redeemable. And with that said, you can do something like underwrite an option. And this is really interesting, right? This is the sort of thing that I think DeFi is really intended to tackle and accomplish. And it can give retail users access to financial instruments that are limited to not just like banks, but the ultra rich and people that are really willing to negotiate. It allows you to lend and to underwrite an option with net lent capital at the exact same time. Whereas, traditionally, in order to do this, you would have to be a massive institution and purchase a bond that obviously is worth enough up front to have another bank think it's worth their time to try to value it properly, and then for some reason allow you to underwrite an option with it. This is something that we can do within one transaction atomically on our front end for Swivel, right? We can have people just immediately lend and underwrite an option at the same time. And on things like ETH, right, where you could be staking, you could be going from ETH, staking, lending, and underwriting an option at the same time. It's effectively like a 25% APY button, right, all in one. It's super powerful and something that I think is honestly going to be a big step up for the fixed rate space. And then this is, again, not something specifically with Premium. They're releasing a V3. It is not going to be included in their V3. So I just want to keep expectations in mind there, but that's part of the goal. UT asks, you talked a bit about Tarot in the AMA. Can you explain a bit more what you meant? I don't think I actually had much of a point. I think we were just kind of like riffing around at that point in the AMA, or not the AMA. It was the call we had the other day with Premia. The Terra is just an interesting protocol, right? And actually, again, we're on stream, so I can pull it up. Let's go to Terra Finance. I don't even know if I have Optimism added to this computer. Change. So Tarot is a lending protocol specifically tailored towards low gas environments and liquidity positions on things like on effectively Uniswap v2 clones. Uniswap v2 clone liquidity positions are very predictable to value, right? You know that there's a certain amount of value on each side of the market, and you can just use a third currency. Let's say if it's trading in ETH/Optimism, like this position here on ZipSwap, and this much is on the left and on in ETH, and this much is in Optimism. Well, you can easily just say, okay, well, ETH is trading against the dollar for this price, and Optimism is trading against the dollar in this price, and effectively get the deposited LP value. Um, from that, there's then a lot of things you can do, right? Like I was just saying, the big benefit of DeFi is you can take these positions, value them, and use them again. And in this case, they're allowing people to borrow more capital specifically to provide liquidity again, right? So if you're, let's say, a Optimism and ETH lender, or yeah, liquidity provider, you can take your position that otherwise would be earning, let's see, Optimism, ETH, otherwise be earning about 50% APY right now, which is pretty good. It doesn't cover impermanent loss, remember. These are like just pure fee numbers. And then lever up, right? Lever up at least to, in this case, I believe it's 5 times. Yeah, it's only 5 times. In order to, maybe I think you can go higher actually. And in order to borrow, you effectively borrowed more ETH and more Optimism tokens, commit them to the position to provide more liquidity, borrow more ETH and more Optimism tokens, and you do this over and over. And actually, look, I have a position specifically in this, which is a great example. I've borrowed essentially $6,000 in ETH and $5,200 in Optimism tokens, and I'm currently providing 15K. My initial equity, though, was only 3K in this position. And the effect is that if the price varies in either direction too much, left or right, the amount of debt I have exceeds the value of my position. And at that point, I get liquidated. And that's really interesting because the effect is that you're actually just doing a ranged position, right? A ranged position between 635 and 2,637, which is the exact same thing as Uniswap. So I think my conclusion on in general is that I don't actually know the big benefit here. I only have this position because there's not a lot of liquidity on Optimism, and I would be too much of it if I have too much in already in Uniswap v3. So I was just trying out other locations and seeing if I can optimize essentially. Let's see. Different question, different direction. How do you guys decide on fees, and do they go to the order makers or to the protocol? How do LPs make money? So how do we decide on fees?
I'll be real. They're rather arbitrary.
I try to keep them in line with what some traditional fees would be for low risk investment instruments and management of that, right? Like you have traditional hedge funds with 2 and 20. We take fees around 0.25% or less, depending on the order type. So I think that's important to say, depending on the order type, because if you're selling your yield tokens, that and we only take maybe 0.02 or 0.2% of the value of your massive sale, we might only make $50 on, or sorry, 50 cents on the transaction. However, if you're doing the exact same thing, and instead of just selling your end tokens, you're going from underlying and going through the same process, it feels like a very different interaction for the user. And taking the same percentage of a fee would not be appropriate. You'd be taking the direct underlying. So with all this in mind, we actually modulate per fee or per type of order the fees to ensure that they're rather consistent. That said, they go to the protocol, not to the order makers. And I think this is an important narrative now more than ever. People are talking more consistently about what real yields are. I don't necessarily like that because that implies stuff like compound aren't real yields. But as far as yield farming goes, people are kind of more focused on, is the protocol actually making any money? And we actually have a fair bit of fee generation, right? So I'm actually quite proud of the design that we've ended up with and how that's going. However, the big thing is that regardless of the fee generation on whether it's being directed towards us, towards the makers, the LPs make money in a different way. When you have an order book, LPs don't generally sit there and solely generate fees from, or generate revenue from fees. they generate revenue from a spread between the two orders on the market. So going to our exchange right now, connect. You can see that there is actually a 20% difference. I think there's because a couple orders went through this morning. A 20% difference between the ask and the bid. So this means that if this is actually the same market maker, and it looks like it might be based on the size, you end up in a situation where if they have users buying into one and selling into the other, they're profiting this 20% difference on all those fees or all those trades, right? So in that case, would they really care about a 0.02% fee on the overall volume if they're able to profit off of this differential? Generally speaking, it seems like not really. And that's very important, right? Because that means that one, we can direct fees where they're actually needed. As at this point, it's towards this real yield concept, and two, in the future, it gives us a more sustainable way for us to act independently and separate ourselves or separate the protocol from DeFi Edge Corporation, which is very important when it comes to the decentralization of the protocol and towards the way that people at this point are looking at DeFi projects legally. Yeah, which again, depending on who you talk to, is more or less important. I think there was another question that kind of went along this later in the call, so I'll get into it. Who really are the LPs? Well, I'll be honest, I think I'm one of the larger ones. I think there's as well probably an investor or two. I know maybe you guys know RE7 Capital. I've talked to him a few times, and I know he actively uses our protocol, as well as then just like maybe a couple friends and family, and then probably a few anons and people from our community, right? At this point, we probably have about 20 active users, which doesn't sound like a ton, but in any DeFi, that's actually a lot. When you talk about lending protocols particularly, that's not bad as long as they're actually active and profiting off of the activity, playing the game. So it's not bad, especially for us when we're kind of in this state where we just launched an early market and are kind of just prepping for our V3. I'll be honest with you guys. This has all been a great, not trial, but early rendition of Swivel. And going through the V3, it's more of a future-proofed and complete product that we integrate with everyone on. I'm really excited for it. Can we record the AMA? Checking. Yes, it is recording, but it looks like I'm also dropping a lot of frames, which is strange. Dropping 20%. So I'll check in on that later. When is V3 launching, and can you talk about what is actually different again? So V3 is launching, I'd say, in around a month. I don't like to give hard dates until we are extremely confident in them, because I think that it's a founder, at least in DeFi's priority, to ensure that their developers can work and do so stresslessly. So we're launching in about a month, and what's really different is the number of people we're integrated with and the amount of different applications that really enables. So off the bat, I've already mentioned a little bit about Euler, right? That is a very important integration when it comes to covering the staked ETH market and to just covering the generally less liquid and more interesting money markets. So I'm in general a big fan of them. That's one of the things I'm most hyped about. Them, Lido is, again, very important covering the staked ETH market. And then beyond both of that, I think there's then some interesting things when it comes to, okay, we've now integrated with Yearn. We can say that if Yearn is really providing a better rate and an optimal rate, which it is not right now, then we have that offer available for our users. We're also integrated with Aave, finally, which is more important for our layer 2 and other integrations. And last but definitely not least, we're integrated with ERC4626. And this enables an entire host of different applications later down the road, right? There's not many people that have used this yet, but anyone in the future that ever utilizes the common concept for yield vaults will be pre-integrated into Swivel. And specifically, there's some interesting stuff when it comes to staking derivatives across various ecosystems, right? There's the opportunity to create a number of staking derivatives that conform to these standards, and we are already able to be partnered with. So this is some stuff that it's early conversation, so I don't want to hint that we're really getting too far into that yet. But there's a lot that we're thinking about in terms of providing the ability to have hedged capital block space markets um, across a number of ecosystems, not just ETH, right? And I think that's extremely important when if anyone thinks that Cosmos or Solana or Polkadot, any of these ecosystems are going to grow, there will be insane demand for any product that can provide their stakers and their infrastructure providers actual hedged risk, and beyond that, the ability to trade around and actually fix the rates and any of the above. Um, what do you guys think about Compound V3 and Aave and Ghost? So Compound V3 is interesting. I'll run through these. Compound V3, I feel really bad. Rather, let me rephrase this. There's another protocol that launched about a month ago called Interest Protocol, which is essentially Compound V3. And Compound V3 was announced like 3 days after they launched as well. So that really, my heart goes out to Getty and the GFX Labs teams building out Interest Protocol. But what it effectively is, and I'll actually just pull up Interest Protocol because it's actually live. Is a money market where all of the yield is, I do not think this is the right interest protocol. All of the yield is directed into one single asset. And this has a couple of effects. One, I mean, for the most part, if you're doing this, you're going to be wanting to direct that yield to a stable coin. Because most people would prefer to get their yield, and a lot of the deposits currently are in stable coins. So that being the case, you create a stable coin, you start to direct yield to it, and because there's all of this demand, or specifically all of the yield is only going to the stable coin, its yield should be relatively high, and anybody purchasing it is able to garner yields is able to profit off of that. So this inherently creates demand for the stablecoin rather than the entire minting process, and is rather scalable, right? It's an interesting way to bootstrap a stablecoin as well as a money market at the same time that a lot of people feel a lot more comfortable with than even using Compound to begin with. So we'll see exactly where it goes. Interest Protocol has grown growing very consistently, about a couple 100,000 a week, maybe a little bit more. So we'll see really whether that trajectory continues as far as a percentage-wise growth. But it is essentially the exact same thing as Compound V3. I'll be honest with you guys. So we'll see. It could end up that Compound ends up just taking their lunch. Aave and Ghost. So my understanding is that this is far more of a traditional, just like random stablecoin play, almost, where they're combining, or they're taking on properties of Maker and combining them with Aave. Where you can take your positions and you can mint a stablecoin off of it effectively instead of just borrowing, and then they're able to modulate the stablecoin rates in order to actually increase or reduce demand or supply and keep it to peg. I think this is a great idea. However, I think the interesting comment, and actually this is related to the next afterward, which is why I was kind of waiting for them, is it's effectively just replicating Ferrari, in my mind. I think that anybody that creates these stable coins that have a money market, which is really backing it to some extent, and then to a large extent as well, if the money market gets hacked, the stable coin is likely going to pay for it potentially. These are very, very, very similar products. So we'll see. I actually feel I'd like to see them succeed because I think it's a very solid way to grow their stablecoin base, right? Like no one has really successfully done anything scalable right now up until other than centralized stablecoins. So there will be a need for this sort of product. The question is whether there are inherent risks to this sort of intertwined money market and stablecoin that people aren't really considering. Right? And in Ferrari's case, Rari got hacked. Face said that they were going to pay back the hack. They realized it might be an existential risk for their stablecoin, so they have since essentially refused to do anything, and they're just sitting there. It's like it's a shit show. So obviously, I'd assume this wouldn't be the case for an organization as large as Aave. but they're not that much larger, right? The Ferrari guys were 1 billion plus essentially company at the point that this shit stuff started to go down. So, um, Xerox Cloud asks, is Rari still alive? And what's going on with Faye, I guess? Oh, and I also missed a question about another target for Swivel, but these are kind of related. Is Faye Rari alive? I think. I think they're alive barely. The Faye guys are still doing quite a lot. The Volts team, which is completely based on Faye, and honestly, I feel worse for them because they have this entire infrastructure that they're not entirely relying on. All of these guys are still developing, right? I don't know about Rari and where they're at. They, it seems like, have not had much movement in a couple months, but obviously the organization still exists. There's still actually quite a bit of market cap on these projects, right? They're not dead. We'll just see where they go. That's kind of my only comment there. I will say I have no vested interest into any of them at this point. So you know, there's no benefit for me to say that they'll stay going, right? Keep them. Wat asks, "What do you guys have any campaigns planned going into the V3? And is there a plan for the ambassador program?" So going into the V3, my campaign is largely ensuring everybody knows about how insane everything, or all of the applications you can really do with the V3. Specifically, the things that Euler really offers, strategies that you can try to optimize your staking on, and how you actually participate in the ETH capital markets, as well as, or rather, the ETH block space markets. These are all extremely important concepts. So I'm looking for a lot of people to actually participate and help on that. I hopefully is Rand on the stage? Rand, you there? If you have any ideas, feel free to hop in and just like go for it on the campaigns. But I know we were planning to just in general try to ramp things up going into the V3, right? Without a solid hard date, we don't have any hard dates for other campaigns. But yes, I'd just say off the bat, we will be doing a number of things, whether it's more competitions going into it, more ways for people to get pull-ups or alternatively participate, or like the next question is saying, an ambassador program. We've had more and more questions or people ask about ambassador programs recently, and I think they are great ways to empower your community. It just requires some infrastructure, and I think we're actually at this point where we can actually spend the time creating that infrastructure for you guys to really participate and become a true part of the Swivillian community. Yeah, feels weird to say. I don't say it out loud too very often. Xerox Cloud again asks, what do you guys think about Timeless and their branding around yield boosting? Essentially, he likes it. I think Timeless. I don't want to talk too much shit. I'll be clear. I think the developers behind it are talented, right? I don't think that the product offers literally anything whatsoever. If I did, we could launch Timeless on Swivel today. We could do it today with no changes to our current code base. It would take nothing from us. All it would be is a market where the maturity goes to 2,500, right? Like 500 years from now, or even better, the heat death of the universe, like thousands of years from now. But the big question is there any then use case to doing this, and is it beneficial over alternative products? One second. Hey, come the fuck on! Hey! And the alternatives are effectively, I think that was recorded on different mic. The alternatives are essentially to use Swivel and other yield tokenization products, and at that point, you're actually directly pricing the yield that you're going to get. Whereas with a product like Timeless, there's an alternative dimension that you really have to consider, which is how much time will you be in the market? Is this yield token really worth what you think it is? If you have to sell it 50% before the other person valuing it is. He thinks that it's worth $500 because it's going to yield him $500. But if you only hold it for half the time he does, then is it really worth $500 to you? No. The answer is no. Right? It introduces this massive confounding factor that I don't think is beneficial for anyone whatsoever. So I don't want to say that, it won't find a place. I'm sure it can find a place because that is a speculative market that exists. It's time-based, but it's a speculative market. I just think that it is important actually to not call what they're doing things like yield boosting, right? Yield boosting is it is boosting your yield, not betting that the yields could go up or otherwise speculating, and two, not just betting on that, but betting that your time preference is better than other people. I honestly very much dislike the disingenuous representation of what they're doing. Right? They could be clear about what it is, and honestly, people would do it. People would play the game. But most likely, I think they're just not being clear about what they're doing, and people are going to avoid the product for that reason. What are you guys doing about all the OFAC stuff? And do you block all the tornado stuff? Tornado people. From Worldwide Weeb. Always love this. The OFAC stuff we've complied with the OFAC specific list, the SDN list, for a bit, right? This is something that, as an organization completely based in the U.S., we have a team as well in Serbia, but the organization itself is U.S. based. We have to realize that there are certain limitations on the project while it is under our custody, right? And at any point, there is a degree of progressive decentralization that regulators have to understand where, okay, we're doing things that might be in a gray area, but they're going to become decentralized, right? And on our users' end and everyone's end, I think there is a gray area where over time you need to give up control of the protocol. That has to be done. And while you're acting as the central custodian, you should probably recognize that you don't want to get thrown in jail as well. All this said, the big issue that most people had wasn't this actual list, right? Like the tornado list was 50 people, and a lot of them were like actually legitimately hackers. They didn't just block everyone, I think, using tornado. But a lot of people did then specifically block anybody using tornado, and then not just that, but anyone using tornado and the people that they transacted with. So that became absurd very quickly. Obviously, I've never done any of that. We will not be doing any of that because it is absurd. There's the law that is there for you to look into. This is a gray area, and acting in good faith, blocking all these things before everyone made a stink, and as well not going overboard with it, I think leaves us in a very good position. So yeah. After 5 months, what is the result for another Swiv distribution? I think this is an interesting question that I can't like a lot of these things I cannot say personally too much about because then all of a sudden I'm deciding, right? We need to, as a community, do a lot of this, and that's not a very pleasing answer for people. So I'm going to give addendums to that, right? Just make sure that everyone understands this is not something that I can solely do. This is a community action, and beyond that, I think we can look towards examples of other communities for how we can handle ours, right? There are other communities, specifically Optimism, I think is the largest one that is trying to do this sort of continuous airdrop, where you are trying to reward people that participate positively in your ecosystem, right? And in our case, this would likely be stuff like, okay, you didn't get your airdrop before, you want it now. Have you literally interacted with our contracts, right? Like, why would you deserve an airdrop if now there's been 5 months and no one, you haven't touched the contracts or lent anything at all, and you haven't provided any liquidity or anything, right? Like, that wouldn't make sense. There will be a number of qualifiers. That's just like an example, I'm sure, of something people could use. I think, again, looking towards Optimism, they'll most likely be using stuff like who provided liquidity to the Optimism token, who provided liquidity to the projects in their ecosystem, right? How many transactions have people done on Optimism? These are all heuristics that they're likely going to be using. for the continued distribution of optimism tokens, because it doesn't tell people upfront what they need to do. It just says that, hey, if you are a good actor and you are a good person that is acting in good faith and using the ecosystem, you'll be rewarded for it. And it prevents in that way airdrop farmers, people that are just there for the airdrop and are going to leave. And what it does do is it guarantees that people continue to be good actors in your ecosystem. So that's what I want to do. I want you guys, the ones that have been here and asking the questions for like what's going on for the past 5 months, I want you guys to be fucking rewarded. And we just need to, as a community, ensure that we have measures, and ideally alongside something like Swivel v3, because this is good advertising, or at least shortly thereafter, find metrics that we can use for retroactive, continuous, potentially retroactive distributions, not like a massive one even again, allowing the proper incentivization of activity in the ecosystem beyond just our current liquidity incentives. I think it's a huge opportunity, and not many projects have properly tackled it yet. I can't get into the specifics of it because I don't remember. I'll be honest with you, freelancing here. At the end of the day, I know it was announced at least in a few of our posts, right? And the posts were announced, right? As even if it wasn't explicitly the words, you must click this link to claim airdrop in the channel, which I feel you, right? Regardless, again, my point is that I think the people that have been in the ecosystem, and like if you're doing anything, you should be rewarded, right? Immediately we're able to weed out so many people that should not, like, that were on that list that still haven't done transactions, I guarantee you, right? And they don't deserve it. Or still haven't participated and gotten a POAP, and they don't deserve it, right? These things are very easy for us to disqualify people on. And ensure that we're empowering everybody else, and really, and then as well targeting other communities that we want to target. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Yeah, like other people, I'll say specifically, PairSwap did really horrible. They're not the best example. Everyone literally hates PairSwap now because of their airdrop. But all right. I'm gonna end the AMA. Feel free to leave some other questions though in chat, right? I'll get to them just async afterwards, just not on voice. I really appreciate everyone that shows up as always, and honestly, you guys are great, right? There's a lot to be super excited about in the coming months. I guess I didn't talk about one thing today that I'll start to mention, which is we're working on at something to ramp up liquidity and ramp up the user experience in the fixed rate space beyond just Swivel, right? Something that allows you guys to come to one interface and know that you're getting the best rate every single time. And ideally, this routes the liquidity to Swivel because we're the ones providing that best rate, right? There's a lot of meta games there that we've thought through, and I'm really excited to share all of it with you guys. So all of this is like it's actually a lot public if you're able to like look for it and find it. So if you want to be sleuths, go for it. But more official information will be coming out soon. All right, guys, thanks for hopping on. We do successfully have the recording this time with audio as well. So we'll be putting it up immediately on our YouTube. And as always, thanks for stopping by.